The views expressed on the Final Straw Radio do not necessarily reflect those of Asheville FM, Friends of Community Radio, or any of the affiliate radio stations airing the show. Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM LP at 103.3 FM in Asheville, North Carolina. This is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions, comments, or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you're free to do so. Just send us an email if you end up using any content. If you care to, you can send us letters at our new address, which is The Final Straw Radio, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina 28816. The show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop. This week we are taking a little break to work on other things, and so have taken this time to rebroadcast 2 interviews from 2 other radical and anarchist audio projects, both of which have been doing amazing work. The first we'll present is from an anarchist radio show in so-called Kingston, Ontario called From Embers. This interview was originally released by them in the middle of June and is with Kanahus Manuel, who is a Secwepemc woman fighting against the Trans Mountain Pipeline on her land in a variety of ways. The situation of extraction, forced displacement, and ongoing subjugation on Secwepemc land is one which has many aspects to it, all of which Manuel talks about in this interview. Kanahus Manuel was arrested recently, a few days after the tattoo gathering that she mentions around halfway through the interview. If you'd like to read more on this issue, though, we will be posting a bunch of articles in the show notes for this episode, which you can access through our No Blogs website or via your podcasting app. These links will include both how to support Manuel post-arrest, the explicit call for solidarity from the Secwepemc Women Warriors Society, and also the original links that From Embers included in their blog post. To hear more from Embers, hit them up at fromembers.libsyn.com/website. The second interview is from the podcast Radical People, which recently became a member of the Channel Zero network and is hosted by Eamon Farrelly. In this interview, Eamon speaks with Sweet Pea about the 20-year-strong Mattole Forest Blockades in Humblodt County, California. In this interview, the guest speaks about their experiences participating in this forest blockade, and I thought it was an extraordinary interview because so often we get a picture of direct action, which is very action-oriented, but this presents an experience which is profoundly emotional or spiritual. Anyway, I liked it a lot and found it very inspirational, and I hope you will too. To hear more from Radical People, hit them up on SoundCloud by going to soundcloud.com and searching their name, also via any podcasting app. I had to cut some out of this interview, and you can hear the full version on their platform. They also have a Patreon if you have any loose change kicking around, and are on Twitter at radical_podcast.
You're listening to From Embers, a weekly show of anarchist ideas and practice based in Kingston, Ontario. Tonight we're discussing the resistance to the Trans Mountain Expansion Project in so-called British Columbia. Next up, we have an interview with Kanahus Manuel, a Secwepemc woman currently involved in the struggle against the pipeline which runs through her territory.
Right, Kanahus Beshki request. My name is Kanahus Beshki Manuel, and I'm from the Secwepemc and Tunaqa Nations in so-called British Columbia, Canada. The Trans Mountain Kinder Morgan pipeline proposes to cross 518 kilometers of our unceded Secwepemc territory through the heart of our homelands. This area is of very, very high spiritual and cultural significance because this is the place that our people have lived since the beginning of time. The scientists will say tens and tens of thousands of years our people have continued to occupy and use this area. continue to practice our culture and our language, which flows from our lands. This area is very beautiful. It's a pristine area. It's one of the only inland temperate rainforests in the world, which this pipeline proposes to go through. There's endangered mountain caribou. The impacts of this pipeline, negatively impact our food harvesting practices. We still maintain our traditional ways through our hunting, fishing, berry picking, harvesting our medicines and our roots and our mushrooms and all of our plant foods from the land. And with the land being contaminated, that will, destroy our whole way of life. That's everything that we are based off of is our food harvesting practices. I mean, our whole culture is surrounded around the seasons. And because we have a harsh winter season here, we have a short growing season, and that's the time when we harvest all of our food. So right now is, the beginning of summer, and now our food has become ready in the mountains, and our berries, which are so important to us and our ceremonies. And I talk about this because it is our food, and that's our economics. Our economics, the value and the wealth of our territory is not unquantifiable, like it's in the trillions and trillions of dollars, that the value of our territory is worth if you were to put a monetary value on it. And so with the risk of this pipeline coming through, it will, risk everything, of who we are as a people. One of the things that connects us from the interior tribes to the coastal tribes is the water and our salmon spawning rivers and creeks. And so that's what connects us all the way from the coastal natives and the ocean. And they say that, the salmon is a keystone species, that whatever happens to the salmon, happens to us. So the salmon gets contaminated or the salmon dies or cease to exist, and then so do we as Indigenous people. That's how closely tied we are with the salmon. We're salmon people. And so all along this pipeline route, Indigenous people have said and are fiercely standing in defense of their lands and their waters and the salmon.
You spent some time down at the Standing Rock struggle. Could you tell us a bit about what it was like to be there and why you've said that this struggle against Trans Mountain could become the Standing Rock of the North?
Well, the first thing that I would like to say about Standing Rock is that the government, the United States government, was very successful in eliminating and, wiping out the buffalo, which was one of their main staples and food sources of the Indigenous peoples of the plains. And I saw going there onto the ground there on Standing Rock and just really, thinking about that, about Indigenous people coming together in this area to defend their lands and being, ambushed and invaded upon in all parts of the U.S. and on their last strongholds, the places where they want to protect the Missouri River, their water source, their water. They've already had their buffalo, taken out and eliminated there. That was genocide. That's a form of genocide. What happened at Standing Rock, it was a continuation of these genocidal practices by the United States government that continue to ignore Indigenous rights, inherent rights, which are their treaty rights that are supposed to be protected and upheld, and they're in the country, but they're not. And, Standing Rock showed us firsthand, why we don't want to sign treaties up here, in BC, the modern day treaties that they're pushing, because they've never respected any of the treaties in the U.S. Not one single treaty was honored. I think that we learned a lot from Standing Rock and some of the things that we don't want to do and some things that we do want to do. And we always learn from every movement, every collective resistance out there. That's a collective intelligence. That just doesn't belong to one person, but it belongs to our whole movement. When we're against capitalism, we're against colonialism, imperialism, we're for our Indigenous inherent rights to self-determination. That's what we're all fighting for. We're fighting against genocide. And in our outreach, we gained a lot of networks and outreach collectively for our movement, against the oil and gas industry, against resource extraction, Indigenous sovereignty. We gained a lot of allies during Standing Rock, and we need to take advantage of that and really promote the unity that was gained there at Standing Rock. And we all want to win. We always want to see the underdog be the winner and come out the winner. We've been working hard to maintain our culture and our ways and our language and put, a lot of our efforts onto decolonization. That's also a part of our movement. It's not just we want to fight and go head on with the government. No, we have to educate. Our resistance comes in many forms. We have to be very creative in our resistance now. We know the way that Canada is going to come at us here with the Trans Mountain Kinder Morgan pipeline. I mean, Canada purchased this pipeline, and we've seen firsthand how Canada's tried to cover up the unceded land issue here in so-called British Columbia. We have never signed treaties. We have no formal land agreement or surrender or purchase, or we never lost our land by war. This is still unceded lands here in British Columbia, and that's where the fight is different. The fight is different here because there is no treaties here. We have authority and jurisdiction over 100% square inch of our territory, and that's what we continue to, fight for, and we're not going to give that up. Secwepemc title, our inherent title to the land, is the underlying title. We can never extinguish our title to that land. Not anybody. That's against our laws, against our belief as Indigenous people. Or people say, we can't own the land, People say the land, is the one that owns us, or, we can never sell the land, upon which the people walk. We can't do that. This title to our land is a collective title. It's held by all the Secwepemc people that have existed, that exist today, and that will exist tens of thousands of years into the future. And that's what we're not willing to compromise. That title to the land is the earth. It's our tumilch. It's Secwepemc uluch. You can never, ever, give that away or sell that. And now, because of colonization and the impacts of colonizations, we have modern day sellouts. That's not us. Any of these puppets or sellouts that the government chooses and manufactures as a leader in order to give some type of consent or some facade of that there's consent by Indigenous people, those are traitors. Those INAC Chief and Council systems that have signed mutual benefit agreements with the Trans Mountain Kinder Morgan pipeline project. My grandfather, Wolverine, he would say that they committed treason, and traditionally you would banish those that committed treason. You would cut off their head. You would do things in front of the rest of the nation to witness, so our people would never do those things. They learnt that those things were wrong. But because of residential school, because of the Indian reservation system, the Indian Act system, and all of these atrocities that hit our people, we have neo-colonialists now, and there are our own brown-skinned people that are siding with the government. And people really need to understand that, because that's the native politics that we deal with on a reservation or a grassroots level in our nation. The Trans Mountain project is purchased by Canada now. I wasn't surprised because I know the lengths and the great lengths that Canada will do to cover up the unceded land issue and the land question here in so-called British Columbia. Because if they recognize title, they couldn't even afford it. It would bankrupt Canada, the amount of compensation they would be owing to Indigenous people because of the amount of resources that were taken off of our land since contact. They will never. So it will be a fight. And Canada is pushing that modern day treaty process. But not only that, they're pushing many different other agreements, mutual benefit agreements, over timber licenses, agreements over, mining, agreements over different things in our territory that are actually written just like treaty, where you extinguish your rights to your land. And we're not willing to take modified rights. We have the biggest power right now standing on our unceded inherent rights entitled to our territories. And we're not going to bow down to Canada. 2 days before Canada announced its bailout of Kinder Morgan had a spill there in Darfield Pumping Station, which is not too far, north of Kamloops, and spilled. At the beginning, they were saying 100 liters, which ended up being more like 45,000 or 50,000 liters or more. And we went up there, myself, my mother, who's an elder, and some other people from our communities, all Secwepemc people, to monitor the spill area and what they were doing to clean up, and just to ensure that we had Secwepemc eyes and Secwepemc monitoring the situation, and let Kinder Morgan know and the government know that we have our own monitors on this. And the day after that happened, Kinder Morgan applied to the Crown to increase the injunction province-wide. So they're saying that anybody that knows of this injunction needs to be 10 meters from large signs that they've erected, Trans Mountain signs, and then 5 meters from the smaller Trans Mountain signs that they erected, and not to impede any Kinder Morgan workers, employees, or contractors. And that could be anywhere leading on a highway to the workplace, anything. So any way of impeding them. And they're saying that this will amount to 7 days real jail time. And what we're saying is that as Indigenous people, we can't be included in these blanket injunctions of Jane Doe, John Doe, because we are Secwepemc people. We are Indigenous people that continue to utilize our lands and, our current use and occupation, our ancient current use and occupation, our customs, our ceremonies that we continue to do. On July 7th and 8th, we'll be going and conducting our traditional tattoo practices and ceremonies right there in one of the impacted areas where this Trans Mountain pipeline threatens to cross, which is actually an ancestral village site. It has like 37 pit house depressions and remnants of our traditional winter village. And then on the other side of the river has hundreds of them. So it's a very significant area for our people. It's being threatened by Trans Mountain pipeline. Our people are not going to stand idly by, while our lands are being threatened, especially when it's taking food off of their table for their children.
Can you talk a bit about the Tiny House Warriors project?
Yes, the Tiny House Warriors, Our Land is Home, is a project, an initiative pushed by our community, really to look for a solution, how we're going to fight this pipeline, but also build on the idea of being climate leaders. We've built our pit houses, first one in 150 years that was lived in our nation. We've built cordwood houses that were bulldozed down by Sun Peak Ski Resort and the provincial government. We've built other cordwood houses. We've built straw bale houses and our cedar bark lodges. And so it's nothing new for alternative housing. Alternative housing is just a continuation of all our decolonization work and our revolutionary work that we're doing in our communities and nation. And so tiny houses is something that was just really trendy, and it's the buzz happening around the world right now. Tiny houses, increase, your love for your land by downsizing, your impact. When you go to downsize into smaller homes, and I know because I've lived in our traditional pit house for many years, and I know how you have to downsize in order to live in those close and tiny spaces with me and my partner and my 4 children. And so you actually realize what's important and what's not important, and you get rid of a lot of clutter. We could have just went and built tiny houses, but we're all building them all on wheels because, like I said, our houses were bulldozed down by the provincial government when we stand up to protect our sacred mountains. And Canada has been doing this to our people all along, and we decided we're going to be mobile. We're going to be mobile because we know how the federal government, the Crown, the provincial government, and these corporations come at us with low-level injunctions and criminalize us as Indigenous people. And we want to be mobile. We want to bring attention to this issue. We do not want to end up in jail. That's never our goal, is to end up in jail and accumulate a list or arm length full of charges. We could talk about a lot of different things, and the issues of injunctions comes up in this conversation, because that's why we chose to have them on wheels, to be mobile, to be on our territory. 518 kilometers it's a big territory, and we need help and we need support. And we decided to do homes because it's a way that we want to fight. While we're building this resistance and this beautiful form of arts of resistance, we're going to have homes to sustain our people. And we're going to show our people we can go out onto our territory. We can leave the reservation, the 0.2% of our lands, this concentration camp. We can leave, and we can go out to our territory, and we can live, and we can assert our title to our lands. We can assert our rights to our lands. And that's what we want to show. And if the government wants to come at us hard down on us for, providing our people with a basic human right, homes on our own territory, then they're going to be exposed. It's going to shed light onto the whole world, the true ugliness of Canada.
What kind of support are you looking for, both on your territory and also just around the continent and around the world?
Well, around the world, we need people to know that, and we need people to really get educated and to educate others that Canada isn't the top number one human rights crusader of the world, that they are violating rights every day, Indigenous rights. Thousands and tens of thousands and possibly hundreds of thousands of Indigenous kids that are, swept away in the child family services, kidnapped more, and that are apprehended now at the height of residential school. This is happening in Canada. We need people to know this, because this is the way that they're treating us. They're targeting our children. Canada is a violator of human rights. They are evil, conniving, sneaky, manipulative country that has continued to get rich off the backs and the blood and the bones of Indigenous people. We need to continue to expose that this is what's happening to us. And underlying all of this, we're fighting a pipeline, but we're resisting against a genocide being committed on us at the hands of the Canadian government. And Indigenous people now are uprising, and we need the community, the world community, the movement in the world, to stand with us and uprise together with us. We are the ones with the heart and the drive and the power, because we have the love. We can build on that. We can build this momentum, this world community for our lands, for our water, for our air, for everything. We need to shut down the Alberta tar sands. The local grassroots level here, we need resources. And it's sorry to say, in this capitalist system, we need money. We need people to help support us. We need builders. We need skilled builders. We have 6 more tiny houses that we're committed to build. You want to come and bring a team of builders. We could get a tiny house. We have the trailers. We have our Tiny House Warriors Facebook page. We have a GoFundMe. All of the GoFundMe money and funds goes directly into lumber and supplies.
Do you have a sense of any kind of timeline? Like, I know things are changing fast right now, but is there work happening right now, or do you expect work to be happening in the near future?
Right now, there is the Trans Mountain workers. They went in there erecting signs all along the pipeline. So the proposed areas of the man camp, there's 3 proposed sites for man camps, up to 1,000 men housed in these man camps within our territories. Our concern are these man camps that they want to build, because they're built are prime berry picking areas. And the link around man camps and the increase in violence against women, is there in all the research around North Dakota, in the north and the fracking communities where man camps have existed already. Some of these places have been impacted by man camps for decades already. The ratio starts to increase of 5 men to 1 woman and up. In the communities, you'll see that violence against women increase. And we have a declaration, a women's declaration against the Kinder Morgan man camps, the Trans Mountain man camps. We know that the man camps is one of the biggest threats, because they need their construction workers in order to build this pipeline. They're stockpiling pipes in Kamloops and in Vavenby in our territory, and they're getting ready to push them through. At Standing Rock, they were laying 100 pipes a day. So we can see them moving really quickly, and we need to mobilize, and we're going to need everybody, active, able bodies to come out here, this summer to, assist in this movement and to stop this pipeline from coming through, work with everybody you can to bring attention to the Alberta tar sands. We need to stop the money flow. Canada, purchased this pipeline, but they still need insurance. This pipeline still needs insurance in order for it to be constructed, in order for this oil to flow through it. These insurance companies need to be targeted. Then we need to, call on everybody to divest their money out of this pipeline. There's pension plans that are funding this pipeline. People need to be educated on where their money is being invested. I saw it. I saw it firsthand, at the Mount Poly mine disaster, owned by Imperial Metals, a Vancouver-based company, getting its permits from the provincial government, and them just still pushing this mine through, even after it had one of the top mine disasters, where government and corporation are saying they've always been working hand in hand together. It doesn't even matter whether, Canada had purchased it or not. Canada needs to, in order to save face to the investor community around the world, because Kinder Morgan was going to go down, and it was going to show uncertainty and risk to the rest of the investments here in BC. So we know that our work on the ground pushed them to even make that deal. They're scared. At the end of the day, they're scared because they can't hide this. Unceded land, the last of the wild Indians, and we're only getting more fierce and more powerful.
You just heard an interview with From Embers by Kanahus Manuel of the Secwepemc Women Warriors Society and Tiny House Warriors. Stay tuned next for an interview with Sweet Pea by Radical People on the Mattole Forest Blockade. This is The Final Straw.
And then onward.
Yeah, I'm happy to give context of what the forest is, what it looks like. And then I also think I want to share my story. I was the only person that was arrested out there. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I want to
go into it,
share that story. But I have other funny stories and silly stories and magic stories, and so it can be whatever you think.
Why don't we lay into the context, like you said?
Okay.
And give us maybe a brief description of what we're looking at, the space, the topography, what you're dealing with, getting in and out, and that sort of thing, and then also just a brief campaign sort of history, just how long this has all been going on.
Okay.
Okay, so you've spent a lot of time in the Mattole Forest, which is in Northern California, for people who don't know. And it's, as I understand, it's privately owned by a timber company, correct? Mm-hmm. And most of the tree species, are we talking redwood, Doug fir? What do we got out there? What's the big thing that they're looking to go take?
Yeah, so the forest that we're fighting to protect is actually, it's some of the largest and last remaining old-growth Douglas fir forest in California. So it's coastal Douglas fir, and it's part of the fog belt that connects the fog coming off the Pacific to the old-growth redwoods in Humblodt Redwood State Park.
Okay.
So those are some of the tallest trees in the world, and that's a directly connected ecosystem. So what we're fighting to protect is some of the last that remains. And that land used to be owned by Pacific Lumber. Mm-hmm. It was liquidated in, I think it was 2006, and bought by a company called Humblodt Redwood Company that was formed out of Mendocino Redwood Company to basically acquire all of Pacific Lumber's land in Humboldt County. So they got a lot of the last remaining old growth of that area, and they came in promising the community that they were going to be a more friendly logging company. They made promises that they were going to be more green, more sustainable. They weren't going to clear cut. They weren't going to cut old growth, which in hindsight, if you think about it, there wasn't a lot of old growth left at that point. So anyway, they made a lot of big promises to the community that about 10 years later, we find out, less than 10 years later, we find out that those things are not true. In 2012, they wound up filing 3 timber harvest plans that essentially it would have been the largest old growth timber harvest plan that Humblodt County had seen in about 20 years. So there was a lot at stake there, and the company basically showed their true colors, that they're just out for the money at the end of the day.
Why would they buy it if they weren't gonna, I mean, if it has all this old growth on it, like, why would they buy it and then not log it? You know, it just seems sort of weird. Like, what else out there is there to do?
Well, they didn't say they weren't going to log it. They said that they were going to log sustainably. And the company has their...
And that they weren't going to touch any so-called old growth.
Was something that they made a promise. Yeah. And then in 2014, they wound up changing their definition of old growth, which one of the things that's a little bit complex in California is that there isn't really a standard for what old growth is.
Yeah.
The industry can define it for itself.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so the company, then in 2014, they wound up changing their policy, saying that they needed to have, in order for a forest to be defined as old growth, you needed to have 6 trees over 200 years old per acre for that to be defined as an old growth forest. But in the region that we're working, it's really geologically unstable, so you know, old growth is all relative to the land and to the area, and so that's not really applicable to that region. And it's they were just conveniently making these rules up to
fit their logging plans.
Yeah.
So people have been defending the Mattole for what, like about 20 years now at some level, like with direct action?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're in 2018 now, and the first direct action that happened out on Long Ridge on that same road that we have a blockade up now, on that same logging road there, you know, that's direct action started in 1998.
Cool. So it's the 20-year anniversary for direct action in the Mattole. Since that time, have they been able to log anything in the Mattole since it started, since the direct action started?
In 2014, they started logging Rattlesnake Creek, and that's a little bit closer to Humboldt Redwood State Park. That's actually right on the border. There were people out there when they started felling trees, so it was pretty intense. But in the North Fork headwaters of the Mattole, where we have our blockade, where it is 2 of the THPs that we're fighting to protect, that area they have not been able to log because of the blockades. So that's exciting. Last year, unfortunately, they did get out there and they wound up herbiciding about 170 acres of hardwoods in an ancient forest that had never been entered before. So it's a mixed forest.
From a helicopter?
No, they do this practice called hack and squirt.
Okay.
So what that means is they go out there, they hack into the trunk of the tree, and then they spray this proprietary blend of herbicides into the cambium to effectively kill the tree, and then the tree winds up dying while standing.
Okay.
And it's pretty horrific to see.
And they kill these hardwood trees to make, is this so they can make room to, because they want to like replant with more Doug fir that they can then harvest more quickly and things like that over time?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so they're trying to turn it into a tree farm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't want a forest, they want a tree farm.
Yeah, and they define, like, I mean, these are beautiful madrones and tan oak and canyon live oak that they're herbiciding, and they consider these trees to be unmarketable. And exactly like you said, yeah, they're trying to convert this ancient mixed forest into a tree plantation, into a tree farm.
Sure. So you guys have been doing, at some level, direct action's been going on in this space for 20 years. It's an interesting situation because, yeah, it is privately owned. It's not like state land. But let's get, just for people who like aren't from the West Coast or haven't ever been in a place like this. I've been in the region. I've never been in the Mattole, but my understanding is the topography offers a lot of challenges. That it's a lot up, a lot of down, and a lot of right back up again.
Yeah.
And why don't you tell us like what it's like to get stuff in, to get people in, to get stuff in, because it's a heck of a hike, is my understanding.
Yeah. So it's a pretty grueling hike. Like I said, it's a geologically unstable area, and it's also super steep ridges, really mountainous. To get in is pretty intense. We have a few ways to get in. One of the ways that we go in a lot, it's about a 13-mile hike, and it's a lot of straight up, straight down. We're hiking on old logging roads, ranch roads, and we usually hike at night. So I remember the first time I hiked out there, and we were all carrying really heavy packs, because we got to bring our food in.
You got to
resupply,
bring our gear in.
Yeah. And we're all really excited, and I'll never forget it. Like, it was totally kicking my ass, I had this heavy pack on, but I remember we got to the top of this ridge, and there's a full moon, really bright, starting to set, and I looked over at my friend, and they had a huge smile on their face, and I had a huge smile on my face, and we were like, we're here, we're doing it. And it was really magical, and that's when I first started feeling the magic of the Mattole and just really falling in love with that place. The hike can be really grueling, but it also feels really rewarding, and it can be really fun.
Do you guys have like a handful of camps out there or change location camps, like just for people who are, staying and supporting and doing blockades and stuff?
Yeah, we have some encampments out at the blockade itself.
Mm-hmm. So like for water. Yeah. You got springs?
Yeah, so that's one of the beautiful things about out there, and that's one of the reasons that we're fighting to protect it is the Mattole watershed is, we're drinking fresh springs right out of the mountain.
Because if you guys had to carry in water, you'd be like DOA.
We wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's fresh water out there, but you do have to bring in probably most food, I imagine.
Yeah.
And to do that, it's 13 miles out back to civilization, and 13 miles back in. You're going up and down crazy steep hills. Mm-hmm. So this is to participate is something that someone's really got to believe. Someone's really got to have the love to do this.
Yeah.
To undertake the effort.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, if you have a specific incident you want to tell me about that happened to you when you're out there, you can set the scene for me. You got in a little trouble, I guess?
I did get in a little trouble out there a few times. Yeah, let's see. So, well, now I'm thinking about that story when my first hike in, and I guess it's really fun for me to remember the beginning when I first started falling in love with that place. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget the first 48 hours we were out there, and there was a whole bunch of us, and we were setting up the first blockade. This was in 2014.
Oh, you were guys setting up a tripod? What were you setting up?
Yeah, we're setting up a tripod in the road, mm-hmm. and we were doing it in the night. The moon was with us. We were all energized, carrying heavy boulders and heavy logs, and everybody's walking up and down the road and just smiling, just a lot of energy. And yeah, I just remember that time really just feeling really inspired by the people I was with and feeling really aligned, like this feels right. Mm-hmm. And so that was pretty blissful time. And so we set up that blockade, and there was a sky pod attached to it.
So for someone who has no idea what this stuff is, a tripod is like 3 logs that are stacked in sort of like a little pyramid, tied together at the top, and then a person can like clamber up this thing and sit on it or hang directly under it, and it's in the road so trucks can't go through.
Exactly, yeah.
And then when you say you have a sky pod, that means there's a rope tied between 2 high up things, presumably trees, and in the middle of that rope, so it's going horizontally, in the middle there's a platform or a basket of some sort where a person can sit on.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
So the way we have it set up, and there's been a lot of different iterations of this over the years. I think it can look a lot of different ways, but the way it was set up in 2014, yeah, exactly like you said. Yeah, we had the tripod in the road, and I should say that I think one of the reasons why we've been able to be so successful in this blockade over the years is because that's the only access road to 18,000 acres.
Okay.
So when we shut that logging road off, and you know, that logging route, it's a choke point. So there's a big hill that goes up, and then a big hill that goes down, like, kind of, you know, it drops, kind of a cliffside. So there's no way that they're getting around once we have that thing set up.
Okay.
So that's something to our benefit. And yeah, so we have the tripod in the road, and then the SkyPod, the rope is attached to one of the trees in the first units that is marked to be cut. And the person that lives in the SkyPod, it's about 150 feet down the rope. So they're really kind of, once you're in the pod, you're kind of in your own world down there.
So that's not dangling over the road, that's way off.
That's way off, yeah. Yeah, and you're kind of, you're more in the trees.
Is it tethered to the tripod itself, or is it just tied to two trees?
It's tethered to the tripod.
So if they mess with the tripod, they're not only messing, is there someone sitting in the tripod too?
In 2017, we had a little more complex one. So we had a nest in the tripod and a sky.
So the 2014 one is like, these people drive up. There's tripods in the road blocking it, and if they move it, the person who's hanging in the skypod like 150 feet away would fall.
Yeah.
So it's like this weird Rube Goldberg mousetrap thing that they can't touch it, or else this person who's really far away in the tree will fall down. Yeah. Cool.
Exactly. And they kind of did exactly that, and it was pretty scary. We got that set up, and then you know, the company came out. They're like, "What the f*** is this?" And then, sure enough, the next day they roll out with the Humblodt County Sheriff Department. They roll out about 5 trucks deep, and they're not playing around. I don't know if you know much about the history of Humblodt County Sheriff Departments, but they have been pretty notorious for being pretty violent and have a lot of anger towards tree sitters and forest defenders, and so there's a lot of aggression that they were bringing in.
I've heard in the past that they physically beat people up and stuff like that.
In the Palco days, I've heard some really gnarly stories. It's just, you know, they feel like they can get away with things because they're in the backwoods and there's less accountability. And so I had heard those stories, and so when they started rolling up, a lot of us were really scared. We got caught off guard. They came early in the morning, and we had about like a 5-minute warning before they were on top of us.
Could you kind of see them coming up the ridge? Did you guys have like a higher vantage point? You kind of see them driving up? Yeah, and you get the oh shit moment.
Yeah, exactly. There was a major oh shit moment, and we were totally caught off guard. A lot of people ran, which I kind of surprised myself in that moment. In that moment, I felt really called to stay. I felt that it was really important that somebody be there, because like I said, the person in the skypod, they're so far down and it's really windy. They can't communicate for themselves. You can't hear what they're saying. We have to communicate through radio. So I felt it was really important to be able to be the spokesperson for that person in the pod. So I stayed. I decided I was going to hold my ground, and before I could even get a sentence out, they whipped my arm and I was in cuffs.
Really? Because someone had to stay there to explain to them, you can't move this because that person's tied to it.
I felt it was important.
Because if they don't know that, they can be like, all right, let's get this shit out of the way. They don't know that.
Exactly, and it's pretty complex, and when you just see the pod, it kind of just looks like a slash pile. It's only one rope that goes down to this sky pod, and you have to actively look to find it. It's not very obvious thing. So I just kept saying the same thing over and over. That's a lifeline. Somebody's life is on that line. Don't touch that line. Don't touch that line. So I'm standing there in cuffs, and it started escalating pretty fast. One of the Humboldt County sheriffs actually started grabbed the line and started shaking the line. Person in the pod is hysterically screaming. They're really scared.
And everyone can hear this. The
really
cops
scared.
could definitely hear that screaming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm just explaining, that's a lifeline, that's a lifeline. One of the cops pulls out a knife. He takes a knife and he grabs the rope, and I'm like, if you cut that, like, you're going to kill that person if you cut that line. And he looks at me and he says, if that person dies, that blood's on your hands.
Because somehow that makes sense. You're like, I'm like telling you right now and explaining that you really shouldn't do that.
Yeah, so at that point I'm hysterical and I'm in shock. And it's taking all of my might, all of my courage to just keep saying over and over and over again, just those 4 words. Don't touch that line, that's a lifeline. Don't touch that line, somebody's life is on that line. Eventually they finally cool down, they figure it out. Meanwhile, the Humboldt Redwood Company executives, there's 2 executives that are standing there watching the whole thing go down, not saying a word. And
can I ask how many trucks of cops came out with them,
it's hard to recall. I think it was about 5.
So there's one set that's dealing with you, talking to you. Did the rest of them run and chase off all the homies and scatter after them in the woods?
Actually, that provided a little bit comedic relief for me, which was good because, eventually another friend came down up on the ridge side to communicate more safety issues and, to be able to be a spokesperson. I'm thankful for that person because I was in shock at that point, and so they were able to, again, communicate the safety issue of the pod and the life on that line. And one of the, most of the cops were pretty overweight and out of shape. So one of these fat cops tries to chase after our friend up this hillside, and he got about 3 feet or something. And he's like, okay, and then just stopped. So the chase scenes were kind of funny. They didn't get very far.
That is kind of funny because you guys have to be dealing with these intense hikes all the time, up and down, in shape, have the endurance, have the stamina, and then they roll out in a couple of cars of some people who, for better or worse, aren't in the best physical condition, and you guys scatter and then make a very brief attempt to chase, nope.
It's also really hot.
Yeah.
It was really hot that day, probably about 95 degrees, the sun's baking down, we're all dripping sweat. They were not interested in playing those games. I think they think that we're pretty weird and nutty.
They just think you're just this granola crunching Lord of the Flies. So they didn't cut that rope. What was the result of the day there? So
they wound up putting me in the cop car for about an hour while they're trying to find people and find people's stashes. They wound up taking a lot of gear that day, which was a bummer for a lot of people. And it was too hot. They didn't feel like chasing people too deep into the woods, so eventually left. And it was pretty intense for me, I remember, because the hike out there had been so magical, and it's about an 8-hour hike out there, and pretty grueling. And then to go back in a cop car, seeing that place, feeling myself being separated from that place that I love, felt it hurt. So, but they didn't keep me out for very long because I was only in town for about a week before I was like, I gotta go back out. Yeah. So I eventually got back out there, and it's my heart's home. The Mattole I dream about it when I'm not there. So I felt I needed to go back, and they wound up dropping the charges, and the company realized that it would be really bad for their image. They didn't want any more bad PR than they were already getting. So I think they kind of pulled back.
From all the lore and the mythology of the Mattole, and all the stories I've heard people tell, I understand that it can be sort of a place of a little bit of, maybe a bit of paranoia.
Yeah.
A bit of, and probably some trauma, things like that, a little PTSD sort of stuff. From just like, you get surprise raided, things like that. Like, it keeps you on edge at times. Would you say that's accurate? That it can be tough to stay out there for long periods of time, just due to like always wondering like when they're going to come for you or that sort of thing?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, yeah, there definitely is a lot of paranoia. There definitely is a lot of PTSD, especially, we're organizing with people that were out there during the, also out there during the PL days, and there was a lot more trauma at that time. So there definitely is always that element of feeling like you need to be ready, feeling like gotta be, I always want to have my gear sorted, I always want to have my bag stashed, I always want to be ready to run. At the same time, there's a lot of just kicking it on the road, and there's a lot of just having a good time and connecting with people, and a lot of people have come out from all over the country and even from around the world to visit the blockade, and so I've made a lot of really close friends, and just also a lot of time to just connect with the trees and connect with that land and just really be fully immersed in it. So it's a mix of both. For me, that place really saved my life because I've had profound spiritual experiences out there. It's totally wild and quiet, and you're about 30 miles away from the closest highway, and you don't hear any city sounds, you just hear birds. And when you're out there for longer lengths of time, you really just fall into the magic of, I call it fairy time. You just fall into Mattole time, where you're just there, present. You're just living as, you're part of that ecosystem. You're just totally immersed in it, and that forest just, I feel, has really embraced me, and so I feel tremendous amount of gratitude for my experience up there.
If anyone wants to go, if they're hearing this and they're like, why am I not doing this? I should be doing this. What would you say is a good amount of time for someone to say, like, that's worth it to go? Like, if you can set aside this amount of time.
For me personally, I think that 2 weeks is a magic time, because it really allows you to, when people are just going out there to do reef supplies, we suggest that they carve out about 3 days, because it's a day hike out. You want at least a day recovery before you hike back out.
Yeah.
And there have been people that have done it in short amounts of time, but it's really rough on the body, and it's really nice to have that recovery time. But if you have more time, I really suggest that people, try to stay, because like I said, it really is magic, and you get to reset your circadian rhythm, and it's very healing, I think, to just be in the woods for a longer amount of time and reconnect with yourself and your wild self.
And then stuff's going on right now. So, like, the thing you just described, that happened in 2014, but right now in 2018, you got a blockade up right now?
Yeah.
You're blockading that same road?
We're blockading that same road. Yeah, we had a blockade in 2014 that was successful, and then we had a blockade in 2017 last summer, which was successful. That blockade went on for 6 months. And then now it's 2018, and
20-year anniversary. Still there.
Still fighting. So now 2018, the new tripod, SkyPod, went up on the summer solstice, and that's tied into a different tree in Unit 1, and people are holding it down.
You guys want help even right now?
We want help.
You want help.
We want
cool.
friends to come out and visit. We love having people to come out. We definitely have a call out. We need more people out there.
Cool.
So,
is there like a town base nearby in like Arcata or Eureka or anything where people like could like land, like a landing zone if people came in from somewhere else, and then they can like gear up with stuff to bring to help resupply? You have like town people who help, or? Yeah,
so one thing that I'm really thankful for is the Humblodt community in general has been really supportive of this campaign. There's a lot of older Earth Firsters that live in the community that are now homesteading and have families, and they're all down. They're all really supportive and supporting in different ways. So we do have a lot of people in the community that are helping out. So if people come from out of town, we can get them set up and get them ready to go and help transition from town to woods and vice versa.
What's your one piece of advice?
Definitely bring a good pair of shoes, I think, is pretty crucial. And I don't know, just having an open mind, being able to be present and just adaptable, resilient to what's going on. The weather in the summer can be pretty hot, but it gets cold at night. So you want to have your wool hat and your wool socks ready to go. And because it's the fog belt, the fog will often come through, even in late summer. So a nice raincoat is good to have. People can contact us if they're interested in getting involved. They can send us an email. It's mattoleactioncamp@riseup.net. And yeah, I definitely encourage people, if they're curious or interested, they want to have more questions, they want to get involved, reach out to us. We would love to have you.
I hope someone else who listens to this, or 10 people who listen to this, decide it's time to go.
I hope so too, and it's definitely a privilege to be able to be out there for extended amounts of time, so I feel really thankful, and I just feel like the more people that can reconnect with their wild selves, the better. And it's saved my life. It completely transformed my life. And the Mattole is a magical place. And I think that a lot of people could find a lot of healing being out there.
I had one other thing. Oh, how can people give you money?
Oh, well, we have a Facebook. It's Save the Mattole's Ancient Forest on Facebook. And you can check out on there ways to donate. Or send us an email. We're trying to get like a GoFundMe or whatever those things, but I'll be honest, we're not the most tech savvy. We're a bunch of woods people, like a bunch of Luddites, so
Absolutely.
We're still figuring out how to do that stuff. So, and we could use all sorts of different support. A lot of people can't do that physical hike, and I understand, but that's not the only help that we need. We could definitely use more help with media. We could definitely use more help getting the word out. And so I encourage those people to reach out also, because we're definitely trying to create a bigger movement, and we want to get more people involved. So if people are interested, curious, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. This campaign in particular is incredibly inspiring to me. It's one of the reasons why I love working on this campaign, because the history is incredible. And people could, and I hope they do, write books about it, because the dozens and dozens of different iterations of blockades and lockdowns and all sorts of intense stories that have gone on out there they're inspiring, and I feel a lot of gratitude to the people that were out there in the early days, in the early 2000s, that were fighting for this land, because in thanks to them, a lot of the forest that I fell in love with, that I'm fighting to protect now, it's there because of those people. And so that's a legacy that I feel really grateful to be connected to, that history. And so all those people that were out there that I never met, I love them.
One day they'll say that about you?
Well, I hope that this doesn't go on for another 20 years.
You hope the win is just permanent.
Yeah, and that's one of the struggles with this campaign is, we're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep fighting till the end, and there are new generations coming in that are
I have it on good authority that capitalism is going to collapse fairly soon.
I've been waiting for it.
And then there won't be any need. The logging concern will go under, and then so. If you guys can hold it down for like 8 more months, I'm pretty sure there's going to be a worldwide leftist revolution, and that or super volcanoes.
Well, I'm waiting, so.
Thank you so much for this time and this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for holding this space for me.
To get in touch with the Mattole Forest Blockade, you can email mattoleactioncamp@riseup.net, and Mattole is Mattole. And you can hit them up on Facebook by searching Save the Mattole's Ancient Forest for news and updates via that platform.